Hey there, art nerds. As we near the end of Mermay, I thought it would be fun to share a 3-in-1 tutorial with you guys. So together we're going to sketch, ink, and watercolor this adorable little mermaid. If you just want to paint along with me, my patrons over on Patreon have access to the printable line art. But I'm going to take you guys through the process from start to finish. So grab your pencils, grab your pens, and grab your paintbrushes, and let's get started. I've got a thumbnail sketch that I'm starting with, and this is just kind of a guideline. Originally, I was going to do it in my smaller Canson XL watercolor sketchbook, and then I realized that it just wasn't going to work the way I wanted it to. So I switched over to a larger Canson XL. I am sketching very lightly in Pentel Red Lead, and first, I sketched an oval shape in about the center of the paper, and then I drew a dividing line and used that to start placing my mermaid. I'm drawing in what I call my dots for eyes style, and I have some more in-depth tutorials on how to draw cartoony art, so I'll link those for you guys down in the description below. But right now, I'm sketching everything very loosely, keeping it kind of light, and I'm just trying to place everything, referencing my thumbnail as necessary. So it's not going to be just like the thumbnail, but I was pretty happy with the composition of the thumbnail, so I decided to just kind of mimic it. Once I've got everything kind of loosely placed and I'm happy with the placement of it, I'm going to go in and tighten up my details. This is going to make it easier for me to ink and easier for you guys to see what I'm inking. If you don't need to do all this drawing, if you can go in with the inks earlier, do that. You don't have to do things exactly the same way that I do them. Do them the way that you are comfortable with. But me, I need these guidelines. Just helps me figure out what I'm doing. It's just kind of hard to explain. I kind of have learned over the years of inking and sketching where I can cut corners and where I need to make sure all my details are spelled out. And when it comes to a sketch like this, I just really need the details to be tighter than probably a lot of people who ink would really need their details to be. I'm using a mechanical pencil for this, but honestly, you can use whatever colored leads you're happy and comfortable with. Once I no longer need my thumbnail, I just go ahead and remove it, and that frees up some space on the desktop. And I go in and I really start tightening up the details, cleaning things up, and figuring out the shapes. While this red lead is technically erasable, it's hard to erase and it leaves some ghosting. So you want to kind of keep your sketch as light as possible until you're ready to finalize it, and then just finalize those lines that you need. I'm also erasing the guidelines and underdrawing as I go. I pause the camera because it shakes the whole desk and I don't want you guys getting motion sickness on me, but I'm doing that and you're just not seeing that. So that's something else to keep in mind, that we have a lot of guidelines here that are helpful for the sketching phase, but are not going to be necessary later on, and they may even form a bit of a watercolor resist on this cellulose watercolor paper. So when you no longer need them, please do erase them. Here's our finished and cleaned up sketch. Now we're going to move on to inks. So I am using a Sakura Pigma FB brush pen. This is waterproof and alcohol marker proof. And I'm using a sheet of copy paper to kind of act as a buffer between my hand and the paper just so that I don't transfer excess oil or grease to the paper. I don't smear the line art too much, and I don't smear the ink. So unfortunately, it does obscure the line art for you guys just a little bit, but I think the benefits are well worth the sacrifices. So I start by inking the face. Usually when I'm inking, I either start with the most important thing, the thing that if I mess it up, people would most definitely notice, the hardest thing to fix if you mess it up, and I work towards the larger, more simple things that don't matter so much if they're a little bit more freeform or loose, or if I don't have a single focal point that I care about if I mess up. Like let's say the focal point is a tree. It's not really a big deal if I don't ink it quite perfect, for example. I will ink from foreground to background, inking objects that overlap other objects first and just kind of make my way to the back. One of the things I love about brush pens is that they are responsive. So the heavier you push on the brush pen, the heavier the line weight, which is great for implying importance, implying depth, implying shadow, implying weight. Heavier line weights do all of those things. Lighter line weights make things seem further away, possibly less important. Lighter, airier, more delicate. Brush pens do take some getting used to, and there are a bunch of them on the market. This is one that just I happen to like, and it happens to work well for me. But if you are on the market for a good brush pen and you are a little bit heavier handed, you don't necessarily have as much practice with brush pens, the Tombow Fudenosuke is also a great option. It comes in two different nib hardnesses, a softer one, which is still firmer than the FB, and a harder one. And it also comes in a variety of colors that are both waterproof and marker proof, which is great for my mixed media artist friends. So while inking this, I am just chilling out. I am taking my time. I'm not really trying to rush this because inking is one of the things that can be very unforgiving, especially if you're like me and you're not going to do any corrections at all to your inks. You just have to live with the mistakes until you finish watercoloring it, because I've noticed that if you try to correct mistakes in your inks before you paint it, it's going to be noticeable once you try painting over it. But if you have found a good correctional option, I've tried like watercolor ground for correcting mistakes, and that doesn't work so great either. If you found a good option for correcting mistakes that you can then paint over, let me know, because I would love to give it a try. So on the seashell, you can kind of see what I'm talking about, where we have our thinner lines, and then with a little bit more pressure, we can get a nice thicker line, and that gives a lot of bounce and vitality to our line art that you wouldn't necessarily get if you were using a technical pen or a fine liner, because those all have fixed with nibs, and they are available in different sizes. But something I love about brush pens is it's like you get 8 fine liners in a single pen. I finished inking the illustration, I allow it to dry for 24 hours, go ahead and scan it to share with my patrons on Patreon, and just let it sit. So after 24 hours, I'm going to grab my masking fluid and we're going to go ahead and mask out the stars and the pearls in her hair. So you could also mask out the fish if you want to, but I'm actually going to use this to create a little bit of atmospheric perspective. And my trick for using masking fluid is work in a small bottle. So I'm using Winsor & Newton's removable masking fluid. I'm using a synthetic brush, and I have worked some brush soap into the fibers of my synthetic brush. I'm also going to splatter some bubbles using our masking fluid. I'm going to do 3 layers of our background color. So you may wish to do a layer of splatter in between each layer of background color. I didn't, but I think that would be a really cute effect. Next, I'm mixing up our background color, and I am going with a turquoise, and then I'm also going to mix some phthalo blue into it to give us kind of like a nice tropical sort of color going on here. And I'm just going to paint in the small areas in her hair first, and then I'm going to fill in the rest of the oval, including the fish that I want to appear in the background, using a medium-sized quill. And if you guys are looking for some affordable quills and rounds, I bought a bunch off of AliExpress and reviewed them, and I think you guys would enjoy that review. So I'll make sure to link that for you guys down in the description. Once that layer had a chance to dry, I'm going to mix the color a little bit more saturated and go in for my second layer. This would also be a great opportunity to splatter in some more bubbles before you start painting. So just an idea there. And once that layer dried, I'm mixing up my background wash even more saturated, so more phthalo blue and more turquoise. And this time I'm actually working around those fish that are in the background, doing a little bit of negative painting here. For her skin tone, I'm going to mix up a lighter skin tone using yellow ochre with a little bit of scarlet red and some burnt sienna. But if you are painting along, feel free to make your mermaid any color you wish. Mermaids come in all sizes and all different skin tones, or you can even go for a fantasy feel. But before I start painting her skin tone, I am actually going to paint the veins on the kelp, and I'm using olive green for this just to start out. While that dries, I'm going to apply the first layer of skin tone using a large round watercolor brush. Now, since she's underwater, I could have gone with a toning wash to make it appear like she's actually, part of this environment, but I decided instead to make her pop and leave the colors all very simple local colors that'll really stand out against the background. That first layer of skin tone was really kind of light, so I'm going to go ahead and paint a secondary layer, and I'm also adding another layer to the vein on the kelp. So for this little illustration, I want all of the colors to be really bright and kind of pop. So I'm going to use Hooker's Green for the kelp, and I'm applying a really light wash to begin with, just to get kind of a feel for how this color is going to work with this illustration. Once that layer dried, I'm going to go ahead and apply a second, slightly more saturated layer of our Hooker's Green. After that dries, I'm going to apply our third layer. So one of the nice things about cellulose paper is that it can dry very quickly. I'm also going to go ahead and add another layer to her skin tone. And right now I'm just kind of focusing on creating those shadows. And one of the ways I like to do this with a simple illustration like this one is to really just block it in. Just keep it really simple. Don't worry about blending them out. Just kind of keep it blocky. And for our third layer on the kelp, I'm working much more saturated. So you guys see I've moved over to another well. I've used some of our original Hooker's Green mix, and then I mixed in some more to get it more saturated and to really get it to stand out on the paper. So for the seashell, I want to go with kind of a red-violet color. So before I get to that, I have mixed the skin tone a little bit darker with a little bit more burnt sienna, yellow ochre, and scarlet. I've also allowed it to evaporate a little bit. And as you guys can see, I am blocking in even more of the shadows. I've got my usual made-up light source coming from the upper right-hand side. And since the arm furthest away from us is in the back, it's going to be darker. I mean, we are doing like real simple shading here. One of my tricks for that is if it is further away from the viewer, it should be darker, and it's just going to create kind of this look of it being in shadow. So for the shell, I have mixed up some red violet and some mauve, and I want to create a beautiful kind of ombre effect. So I mixed a little bit more of the color and applied it to the top while it was still wet and blended it out just a little bit where necessary. After that layer dried a little bit more, I'm going to do the same thing, and I'm also going to paint some shadows to create the illusion that we have scallops on this shell. I'm going to go in and do another more saturated layer, encouraging it to blend out by using the color that we mixed for the shell base itself. You don't want to use water necessarily on a still wet object if you want a really clean blend. You want to use the base color to encourage it to blend. If you add water, it can cause blossoming and blooming, which can be a pretty effect, but you want to do it intentionally. You don't want it to be a not so happy accident. I'm also going to draw in the line details on the shell and just kind of blend those out so they don't look so just like I drew lines on the shell basically. And I'm blending it out by using the medium version of the color. So you guys can see I'm just kind of drawing a line and then blending it out just a little bit to encourage it to kind of soften up and not just look so much like a drawn line. At this stage, I'm going to add a little bit of blush, just super simplified blush to her cheeks and under her neck and on her bottom lip, on the inside of her ears. And I think I used Rose Dior for that color, or it might be Scarlet Red. Really, it doesn't matter. You guys can use whatever colors you like and whatever colors you find inspiring to you. I've mixed some phthalo blue, so a cooler blue, in with our Hooker's Green to start painting some of the shadows on our kelp. I've kind of been thinking about what I wanted to do with her tail the whole time, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to go with something very contrasty or with something kind of more monochromatic. So I decided to go a little bit more monochromatic, and I am using phthalo blue to paint the base layer on the tail. I've also mixed up some, I'm not seeing it here, but I did end up mixing up some turquoise for her tail as well. So we have like a turquoise tail, and then her fins are in this kind of lighter phthalo blue. There we go, just when I thought my memory was starting to fail on me. It was just a little bit further on the road. Now, one of the nice things about this turquoise blue is that it is more opaque, so you can layer it on top of the phthalo blue that we were originally using. I can also go in and do some little scale designs, and that'll be a little bit later on, but what I'm doing now for the fins is I am painting in some darker phthalo blue and then blending it out just with some clean water so that it kind of creates an ombre effect as it fills the fins, and it's just kind of for visual effect to make it a little bit more interesting to look at. Another layer of our phthalo blue and hooker's green on the kelp, and we're building up depth. So you guys will notice that on the pieces of kelp that are further away from the viewer, there is more of our cool phthalo blue and hooker's green mixture. This is pushing it into the background and making it seem further away from the viewer. So even though this is a simple, easy illustration of a mermaid, we need some texture going on here. So I am painting using a slightly more, it's like the turquoise that I use for the background mixed with the turquoise that I use for the tail. So it's probably like a turquoise cobalt for the tail. And I am painting a small scale pattern on the more shaded side of her tail. So I'm kind of creating some volume with the scales here. And one of my tricks for painting scales is you want to have a bunch of them. The main body of the shadow, the scales should all be touching or should all kind of blend in together. And then as we reach our light source, you can have just one or two individual scales that kind of imply like the shaded side of the scale, for example. And then on the fins, I want to kind of reiterate what we had going on before with our phthalo blue blend out with clean water. Now at this point, while I was painting this, I was watching Johnny Awesome's playthrough of iSomnium 1. This is my second time watching his playthrough of iSomnium 1, and I must have been channeling Iris because I decided to give our mermaid some bright pink hair. Not really. I just wanted something high contrast. Red would have been a natural choice, but I'm not trying to paint the Little Mermaid here. And I thought pink would be a really fun fantasy color because mermaids are mythical creatures. They can come in any skin color and any hair color you want them to have. So I thought, why not hot pink? And that would also give us some really nice contrast with the turquoise blue that we have in the background. I also decided to add more saturated red violet to our shell and blend that out so that we have a more striking effect. Once my first layer of hair has dried, I am mixing up more of our opera as well as I think it might be Compo's Rose, because with opera you can only reach so much color depth with it. If you really want to start building up saturation and adding in shadows, it helps to switch to another pink. I like to switch to like a slightly cooler pink to start building up those colors, but one of my favorite color combos is a yellow on top of opera, and I really thought about doing like a flame effect with her hair where the tip top would be a yellow kind of merging into a hot red. I'm glad I didn't do that though. Again, that would have been leaning a little too much Little Mermaid, and I think she turned out super cute the way she is. So since this is a fairly simple illustration, I wanted to keep the color palette kind of simple too. So I'm going to repeat a lot of the same colors over and over again. So I am using kind of a mauve color for these fish here in the background. I'm also going to use an opera for some of the smaller fish lower down on her tail, and that's also going to create some contrast. It's going to be a little bit of visual pop there. And I really love how the opera glazes over the turquoise that we used initially in the background. Like, that's such a pretty color combination. You can still tell that it's supposed to be a pink fish, but it looks like it's a pink fish further in the distance. So once her hair has dried, we're going to add some more opera as well as some more of our cooler pink, and we're going to start doing some more layers in her hair, building up those highlights. To be fair, she's underwater. We would not get these kind of striking highlights, so if you don't want to do this, that's totally fine. You can paint this however you want to paint it. And on that note, once that layer dries, we're gonna mix up more of the same, working more and more saturated, and do another layer. And this is where we can really start to see the hair come together. I feel like on its own, Opera Rose is such a pretty color, but it can often be kind of too light, and it can be challenging, I guess, for the camera to pick up. So adding this cooler pink helps make it a little bit easier to see and easier to build up the saturation that we want so we can get the contrast that we want. Now at this point, I felt like the blush was a little bit too light, so I wanted to go in and make it just a little bit darker. May have gone a little too far with that. And I also felt like her skin tone just didn't have enough contrast. We couldn't really see the shadows. So I added in a bunch more burnt sienna, and I'm painting in more of the shadows here. And I'm basically just thinking what would be blocked from light. So if an object is in front of the mermaid and the viewer, like in between us, it's gonna cast a shadow in the way that I have decided the light's going to be. So while I'm waiting for all that to dry, I can start working on some of the fish in the background. I'm going to clean out my little ceramic palette to free up some wells, and I want to add some really bright colors. So I'm using this Sennelier yellow green to paint in some of the fish up here at the top. That was a little bit more desaturated than I wanted, so I'm going to have to go back in and add another layer and just kind of add some more color to it. And they're really going to pop because they're these really bright green little fish. They're going to pop against the background, and they're going to pop against her hair. So then I decided I need to paint some goldfish, and they really do look like the snack crackers, but I just wanted to add in some fun orange fish. And I'm not really doing any details for these fish. It'd be really easy to do like any kind of a pattern. You could do zigzags, you could do spots. I just opted not to, but if you're into fish, this could be a great opportunity to paint some really cool tropical fish. Now I wanted to add another little pop of contrast over here, so I'm using some, it's not scarlet, it's actually like a neon red from Kusakabe to paint the little fish that are swimming in front of the kelp, and then to also paint the larger fish that are swimming behind her. And I want to create a see-through effect on the fin, so I'm going to paint that red on top of the fin, implying that you can actually see through the fin, or that it's translucent. Add another layer of our yellow green to the little fish on top because it just wasn't enough. And then I need to decide what I want to do about these little fish down here at the bottom. I think I decided to do more of the yellow green and just kind of repeat it. It's about time to start finishing things up. So after I give another layer of orange to our goldfish crackers, I'm going to use my masking fluid pickup to remove all the masking fluid that we've put down on the page. So it's not just the stars and pearls in her hair, but the bubbles in the background. Of course, I gotta paint her starfish bra first, and I decided to go with the same orange that I used on our little fish here. Once I removed the masking fluid from her hair, I can start painting the starfish, and I decided to go with a yellow for this. I know, a little bit basic. A blue would have been super cute and popped as well, but I wanted really fun, tropical, almost neon colors for this illustration. So hot pinks, hot purples, bright oranges. So the yellow stars just made sense to me. It's also a good opportunity to just do a bunch of loose touch-ups here and there and just kind of finesse things the way you want them. So since we removed masking fluid, I always struggle to contain the masking fluid just in the area I meant to apply it to. So I have to do a little bit of touch-ups with the hair, for example. I'm also going to do some very light purple centers on the pearls, and really it's just in the center, leaving a white rim around the majority of the body of the pearl, and that's going to kind of create the illusion that these are pearls. I'm going to pull out the masking frisket again and remove the masking fluid bubbles from the background. If you did multiple layers, you got to be careful in case you got any on the fish. You want to make sure everything is fully dry before you pull out your masking fluid frisket and try to remove the masking fluid. Otherwise, you could just end up making a mess or ripping the paper. It's just really easier to remove it once everything's had a chance to dry. All right, it is time to add some highlights with some white gouache. So I went and got a smaller round brush because I want to do some really fine little white details, add little whites to her eyes, add a little bit of white to her teeth, add some white to the tops of the pearls to create a highlight, that sort of thing. Now this is an inked illustration and we have painted on top of the inked illustration, and some of the paints we used were opaque. So I want to take a moment and just kind of re-ink some areas for clarity and to add some contrast back into this illustration. All right, y'all, that wraps up another watercolor illustration. I hope you guys had as much fun painting with me as I had sharing this with you guys. This is one of many new upcoming start to finish, sketch to finish watercolor tutorials, so I hope you guys will keep an eye out. If you're interested and you're new here, make sure you hit that subscribe button and click that bell notification to join me on a watercolor journey. This was made possible thanks to my amazing patrons on Patreon. Thank you guys so much for all your help and support, and I shared this with them early access. So if you want early access to what I do and you want to help me continue to do it, then you can join me at patreon.com/natosoup. I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and I look forward to seeing you guys again soon. Bye guys!